But Dick Williams is in the Hall of Fame. You know why? Because he can manage. You know, and we look at our team today. You look at the Red Sox right now. And you look at Joe Girardi, what he did yesterday. You had Sabathia out in the second game of a doubleheader, going for his 20th win? 20th win. And that big sack of shit couldn't get out of the 8th inning. I mean, I can say that because he's from Vallejo, and I hate Vallejo. I'm from San Rafael. And Bill Buckner, you know where he's from? Vallejo.
I ain't saying nothing.
You gotta know that. Buckner's from Vallejo. When I was in American Legion, I went fisticuffs with him twice. We dropped the gloves twice. We hated each other. And then, who's the general manager here for Proctor?
I haven't figured it out.
Chris. Is it Chris? Caminetti? He comes to me and he wants me to pitch the last game. I said, I ain't playing for Buckner. I said, trade me to Quebec City. True story.
He called me when we were down 2-0 in Quebec. He said, pitch me.
He's gonna lose. I'll tell you, the greatest thing in September 5th, when I pitched that game against Worcester, Gedman was here. Remember we had the party and he just had his arm around me? I love Gedman. I love that kid, you know, and he couldn't believe what I did. And when I was leaving the ballpark, I left late, and there was an elderly couple with a walker. The man was in a walker, and he says, Bill, that was an amazing performance. You know, I knew you were good and stuff, but how can you compete against kids that weren't even born when you played? And I said, sir, that's easy. I'm better than them. And that's the whole thing. You know, trust me, if Arnold Palmer is out on the golf course, you ain't gonna bet against him. If Ben Hogan's out on the golf course, you ain't gonna bet against him. I don't care how old they are, they're good. They can flat out play, and I can still flat out play.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, don't leave. Question and answer thing. But I do want to do one thing. When I was in Pawtucket, I'm in big league camp, and John McNamara was the manager.
You were going to get his job.
I thought I was going to get his job, but I didn't. But I saw the greatest. Now, how many remember John McNamara? I heard when I heard that name, but so much for that.
He looked a lot like that thermostat on the wall.
And I was managing a B game. Now the AAA manager goes to big league camp, and then when you make your moves, then you start minor league camp. Well, I saw an entire dugout impersonate John McNamara, and this was their impersonation. You ready for this? Look at that and think about it. An entire team did that.
That was also Ken Harrelson.
If you don't know, he had a pretty good hunter, I'll say that.
I want to tell you, I saw McNamara in Toronto after they started going bad. I was up there, and it was like, it was 2 in the morning. I came back to the hotel, and he was hanging onto the guardrail. And it reminded me of the time I was Sparky Lyle. We're down at the Roosevelt Hotel, and he's hammered, and he's up against the bricks. He calls the cabbie, and he goes, can you take me back to the Roosevelt? He goes, you're leaning against it.
That was like when Van, the first time I was fired, we lost 6 in a row, and Van called me and said, Ed, what time do you have a curfew? I said, curfew? I've never been back in time for a curfew in my life. Yeah.
I could play for him.
Oh my God.
When I played for Montreal, Jim Fanning said, anytime you're going to be out, just leave your name in my box in the hotel. I wrote up 100 tickets and I just gave them to him right there. I'm not going to be in. I'm not going to be in. I'm telling you, in the old days, if the hotel blew up, 2 ball players would die.
He just reminded me of something. Back in 1963, I only weighed about 140, but I hitchhiked in the ball, and I got on the big league roster with Chicago. Chicago White Sox. I think it was only 16 teams back then. So we had a pitching coach who went down to the local bus depot and had breakfast every morning about 6. Well, now we're having a meeting out in the field one day, and I had seen him 100 times. He said, I wish you were all like Ed Noddle. I see him down by there having breakfast. I was coming in when he was going to breakfast. That's a true story.
I did the same.
Mulcahy, remember Mulcahy, right-hand pitcher? I'll never forget that. He thought I was a good guy. I never heard you in my life.
I did it in Grand Central Station. I'll tell you one of the best. We had a curfew. They said we're going to check us in Kansas City. And I just barely missed it. And Ray Culp, the nicest guy, Baptist, never went out and everything. And he was hungry and he went out and got 3 tacos. And he got a $100 fine. He said, those tacos cost me $33 a piece. But I'll tell you, Canigliere was the best. He didn't go in, and he left the Muhlenbach. And he goes, why weren't you? He said, I checked out of the Muhlenbach. I couldn't stand it. He said, why? He said, I fall asleep at night, and this mouse ran up on my chest. And it smiled at me, and it had spinach in its teeth. And that was...
Does anybody have any questions?
You have meeting.
Something for Bill?
Yeah. Technical Bill.
And Bill. Talking on the strength of your hot foot and all that. What kind of pranks do you think when teammates?
The question was, what kind of pranks, he talked about Yaz, what kind of pranks took place in your life, whatever life you lived? Mine in the bushes, him in the big leagues.
I wasn't a prankster. Guys that didn't have a sense of humor, they had to have shtick. You know, there's Jay Johnstone, he's got shtick. You know, he's not really a funny guy, but he kind of made a career of trying to be a funny guy. The greatest I saw was, he was named Mo Drabowski. Mo Drabowski. And he was a great relief pitcher, but he would take cherry bombs to every door at the executive house, and he'd light them and then run down the hallway. And it was boom, boom, boom. He got traded. He ended up in Atlanta, and they had a team party for Atlanta, and they were down at the pool. And then Mo looks down, he says, how's the party? He says, we got everything down here but TV. He took the TV and he threw it out 22 stories right into the... Oh! He was in the bullpen, and he called the Queen of England. From the bullpen. Mo Drabowski, if you ever look up the guy, he was probably the greatest.
I heard a story about when Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, and Billy Martin were running together. I don't know if it's true, but it's the funniest story I ever heard. They had an off day. They called a cab in New York, and they were going back then. It was, I forget the name of the bar. It was very famous. Somebody should know here. But anyway, Copacabana. They were going to the Copacabana. Well, they drank all day. Now they get in the cab. And the cab driver, not trusting them and not knowing them, made them all sit in the back seat. Well, that's 3 big men. So they said, Mantle leaned up in front with the cab driver and said, I know we're crowded back here. You got room up there for 2 pizzas and a couple beers? He said, yeah. And Mantle went, bleh. I think that's the greatest story I ever heard.
It wasn't the Copacabana, it was Toots Shores.
There you go, you're right, Toots Shores.
It had to be Toots Shores. If you want to read a great book, get, his name was Smith. I can't think of his first name, but he wrote for the New York Times. And it was all of his great friends. And it's all about Toots Shores, about the horse tracks, about Bronco Nagurski and all the old guys that used to play. What the hell was, what was the Smith guy?
Red Smith?
Huh? Red Smith. Red Smith. Red Smith is the greatest writer of all time. He called me the New Testament. When I pitched for Montreal, I had the long beard and the long hair. He called me the Old Testament pitcher. And he did a great story on me, and I'm flattered to this day. You don't realize that I went to Montreal after Boston. And when I was in Boston in the '78 collapse, which is kind of like what we're doing right now, I I lost 4 tough games. Dick Williams left me in the rotation. I won my last 6, and I was 16-10.
Let's hear it for that. That's not a bad number.
And you can look it up. And that's the funny thing. Don Zimmer knew one thing about pitching. You know what it was? Hard to hit.
Yeah, very good. I'll tell you a minor league story. The only time I ever beat the big leagues in 51 years, ever. I'm pitching, I'm owned by the Chicago White Sox. I'm making like $275 a month at Seaball Depot. And I didn't have any money to get home on. I convinced them for 2 years, 2 different general managers, that my parents had moved to Hawaii. All of a sudden, I should get like $31. I had $390.
You're a genius.
Instead of going